1942, the German army issued an internal order. It said, if you are captured by a female Soviet soldier, you are not a prisoner of war. You are an embarrassment to the Wehrmacht. That order was never officially published. It was passed verbally, unit to unit, across the Eastern Front. The reason it existed at all, and why the German High Command never formally acknowledged what was happening, is the most documented military secret that nobody taught you in school. Here is what this video is going to show you. By 1944, the Soviet military had deployed over 800,000 women in uniform. One of them held a kill record that no male sniper in any Allied army had matched. Another regiment flew 23,000 combat sorties in aircraft so primitive they didn't appear on German radar. The Wehrmacht knew about both of them, adapted to both of them, and officially, at the command level, acknowledged neither of them. The gap between what the German frontline experienced and what the German High Command formally admitted is what this entire record is about. And the reason that gap existed is not what most military historians describe. Operation Barbarossa began on June 22, 1941. By December, 6 months, Soviet military losses had reached approximately 4.5 million. Killed, captured, or wounded. To put that number in operational terms, the Soviet military lost more men in 6 months than the United States Army deployed in its entire history up to that point. The People's Commissariat of Defense was not looking at that number and thinking about ideology. They were looking at a manpower equation that had no conventional solution. The institution that authorized female combat deployment was not responding to a political movement. It was responding to arithmetic. And here is the part that changes how you understand everything that follows. The decision was not made reluctantly. It was made fast. Faster than any similar decision made by any other major military in the war. Marina Roskova had already petitioned the INCO in October 1941 to authorize dedicated female aviation regiments. The authorization came. 3 regiments were formed, and then a problem emerged that the Soviet military had not anticipated. The aircraft available for these regiments was the Polikarpov Po-2, a fabric-covered biplane designed in 1927 as a crop duster and training platform. It had a top speed of 94 miles per hour. A Messerschmitt Bf 109 flew at 385. If German fighters found them, the mission was over before it started, and German radar was everywhere. So the regiment did the only thing they could do with an aircraft that slow and that fragile. They turned the weakness into a weapon. The 46th Guards Tommen Night Bomber Aviation Regiment flew exclusively at night. Their method, documented in both Soviet records and German frontline accounts, was precise: cut the engine on final approach, glide in silence through the last phase of the bombing run, drop the payload, restart the engine in the dark. German soldiers on the ground described hearing nothing, then a sudden whistling sound, then the impact. The psychological effect on ground personnel is documented in German unit diaries from the Eastern Front. The regiment flew in 2 pilot shifts through summer nights that lasted only 4 hours. At peak operational tempo, individual pilots flew up to 15 sorties in a single night. German units began referring to them using a specific term that appears in their own diaries, Nachtwechseln. Night witches. That name was not given in admiration. It was given because something was operating in the dark that German air defense doctrine had no mechanism to counter, and the soldiers on the ground needed a name for what was killing them. Simultaneously, a different program was running in the Moscow region. The Central Women's School of Sniper Training was not symbolic. It operated with qualification standards, marksmanship thresholds, and a deployment pipeline that fed graduates directly into frontline units. Soviet military records indicate the program produced approximately 2,000 qualified female snipers over the course of the war. That figure comes from institutional records and should be treated as an estimate, not a verified audit. But what is verifiable is the qualification structure, the same doctrinal framework applied to male equivalents: map reading, fieldcraft, target acquisition under operational conditions, the same curriculum, the same thresholds, the same deployment. The output was not symbolic. It appeared in the casualty arithmetic on the other side of the front line. Lyudmila Pavlichenko's officially credited kill total is 309. That figure comes from Soviet military records and has not been fully cross-referenced against German casualty documentation, a limitation the historical record acknowledges. What is not in dispute, by the time she was withdrawn from frontline duty in 1942, following a wound sustained near Sevastopol, her credited count had already exceeded the records of the most decorated snipers in multiple Allied armies. The Soviet military sent her to North America. She addressed a joint session of the U.S. Congress. She received a White House reception, the first Soviet citizen documented to have done so. And here is the moment that tells you everything about how the United States government processed her record. They didn't invite her as a symbol. They invited her because the number was real, and they wanted their own military leadership to be in the same room as someone who had produced it. For 40 years after the war, almost none of this existed in English. Western military historians writing about the Eastern Front had access to German records, British records, and American records. Soviet archives were closed. The documented kill counts, the regiment sorties, the sniper school graduation data, all of it existed in Russian, behind an information wall that did not come down until 1991, which created a strange situation. The most documented female combat deployment in military history was, to the English-speaking world, essentially invisible. Some historians assumed the Soviet records were inflated. Some assumed the stories were propaganda. They had no access to the primary sources to check. And here is what makes that worse. The German soldiers who had been on the other side of the front, the ones who wrote about female snipers in their letters home, who described the psychological effect in their unit diaries, some of them were still alive. The testimony existed. The archive was just locked. Rosa Sheina was 19 when she deployed. Her personal diary, preserved in Russian archives, not published, just preserved, documents what she thought before missions, what she noticed afterward, what she wrote home about. The record says 54 credited kills. The diary says something different. It says she understood exactly what she was doing and chose to keep doing it. She died January 28, 1945, in East Prussia, shielding a wounded officer. She was 20. The officer survived. Her diary did not stop dramatically. The final entries are operational. Matter of fact, not cinematic. That is the detail that does not leave you. Not the number, not the circumstances. The fact that someone that age was writing it down like it was just another thing that happened, and that the document has been sitting in an archive for 80 years waiting for someone to read it. Here is what the German archive actually contains, and what it does not. Frontline soldiers wrote about Soviet female combatants. Officers filed reports. Memoirs written after the war described the specific anxiety of operating in sectors where female snipers were known to be active. That documentation is real, and it is extensive. What does not exist in the verified German military archive is a single high command directive formally classifying this problem. The Wehrmacht adapted to these combatants at the soldier level, the unit level, and the officer level. It never elevated the adaptation to doctrine, which means the institution that had formally classified every other combatant type it encountered across 4 years of the most documented war in history ended that war without a formal category for this one. The soldiers knew. The officers knew. The letters home knew. The high command, on the record, did not. That gap between what the front line experienced and what the institution acknowledged is the most precise measure of what these women accomplished. Not the kill counts, not the sorties. The fact that the Wehrmacht adapted to them completely and officially pretended it hadn't. When Soviet archives opened in 1991, the documents that came out were not surprising to Soviet military historians. The kill counts had always been there. The regiment records had always been logged. Sheina's diary had been preserved since 1945. What changed was access, and with access came the realization that Western military historiography had spent 40 years writing about the Eastern Front with a structural blind spot built directly into its source base. The 46th Regiment's sorties were not discovered in 1991. They were finally readable. That distinction matters, because it means the history was not hidden, it was not suppressed. It was simply on the other side of a wall that came down, and what was on the other side was a fully documented operational record of a military capability that no doctrine on earth had classified, that one army built at scale, that another army adapted to in practice and denied in writing, and that an information barrier kept invisible to the Western world for 4 decades. The wall came down. The documents were waiting. They still are.